the fall of 2015, someone with the handle Murloc11 posts a thread in the Dark Souls section of the gaming forum GameFAQs.com, asking about a strange door that shouldn't open in the starting area of the game. In the initial post of that thread, the user embeds an in-game screenshot captured in the northern undead asylum, the crumbling stone prison where every playthrough of Dark Souls begins. That image shows a player character, a pyromancer dressed in baggy brown robes, standing in front of the rusted iron door of a prison cell. This particular cell is located directly to the right of the cell the player begins the game in. Behind the bars, an emaciated corpse is slumped beneath a set of blood-stained manacles nailed to the wall. A hollow, kind of mindless zombie that was once a person, kneels in the corner, praying silently. On the floor, maggots swarm around what's left of a dead rat. In the screenshot, there's something present that shouldn't be, a prompt inviting the player to open the door. Murloc asks the forum why this door is accessible. They explain that in prior playthroughs, they recall trying all the cell doors in this corridor, and they don't recall any that could be opened. One person responds that they're pretty sure most of the doors in the asylum don't open. Murloc simply replies by posting their screenshot again, with the message, "This one does." Another user says they created a new character in the asylum to check the door. According to them, it's, quote, just a prop, not a real door. They suggest the prompt showing up is a bug. Murloc again pushes back. It does open, though. I can go inside fine. In a reply to the thread a few hours later, Murloc links a 45-second YouTube video. That clip is still watchable. The player runs up to the cell door. The prompt appears. They press the A button and the door swings open. Stepping inside, they unceremoniously kill the praying hollow. It doesn't fight back. The player then turns to face a small nest of hay tucked in the corner. Because it's placed against the wall just beside the door, the nest isn't visible from outside the cell. It can only be seen from the inside looking out. A soft yellow glow emanating from it indicates a collectible treasure. They pick it up. The item is a consumable called a purging stone. It's used to cure a debilitating status effect called Curse, which only appears in much later areas of the game. The item description reads, ash-colored stone encasing a skull, secret treasure of Arster, the Earl of Kareem. The stone itself was once a person or some other being. Murloc's thread receives no further replies, but in the description of the Undead Asylum video, they offer their own theory about why the cell door can suddenly be opened. Murloc claims that this is their 4th playthrough of Dark Souls. At the start of a playthrough, they say, they usually select a starting gift, the free bonus item players can choose to begin the game with during character creation. On this particular playthrough, for whatever reason, Murloc chose to skip that option and receive no gift. Their guess is that this prison cell exists as some kind of secret reward for players who choose to challenge themselves by opting out of taking a different free item. The version of the game Murloc is playing is called Prepare to Die Edition. It's no longer on sale on Steam, and the servers were shut down a few years ago, but it still runs properly offline. It's easy for me to create a fresh character and skip the starting gift, then enter the game and find the same cell door. But when I do that, no prompt appears to open it. No clip can be used to phase past the door and enter the cell anyway. Oddly, even though it's not meant to be accessible, the cell has full internal textures and collision data. I can walk around and look around inside it without issue, as though it were a normal region of the game. The praying hollow is still there. The straw nest is present as well, but in my game, there's no item inside. So Murloc was wrong. Refusing a starting gift doesn't let you in the door, or at least it's not enough. What's more interesting is that if cheats are used to go inside the cell anyway, the purging stone they found doesn't spawn. That means it's not just a matter of a prompt showing up when it shouldn't. Something deeper about the state of Murloc's game has been changed relative to a normal playthrough. In Dark Souls, changes to the game world are governed by hidden variables called flags. Flags are binary values that get switched on or off every time the player makes a choice. As the game progresses, The engine diligently records each area the player decides to visit or skip, each NPC they helped or betrayed, each item they picked up or missed. The values in these flags are used to inform the game world how it should change based on what the player's done so far. Depending on which flags are set in which order, two players starting from the same cell in the asylum can have very different experiences. Sometimes, bugs or exploits set flags that aren't supposed to be set, effectively tricking the game into thinking something has happened when it hasn't. This is a technique speedrunners might use to break the intended sequence of the game. Sometimes it even happens on its own. In the GameFAQs post, Murloc claims they noticed the door right at the beginning of their playthrough. That corridor appears less than 30 seconds into the game. There are very few, if any, flags the players had the chance to change by then. However, if this is really Murloc's fourth playthrough, that means that, technically, their save file already contains records of hundreds of flags set during their prior runs with different characters. Some games use a system called meta progression, where the game treats the player differently not only based on their actions in any one playthrough, but also based on the accumulated choices made over every prior playthrough. Now, Dark Souls is not that style of game. In Dark Souls, the choices you make on one character aren't supposed to affect the playthrough of another at all. But underneath, all those choices are just contiguous data, sitting side by side on the same file. In theory, it's possible for the game logic to tweak a particular part of the environment based on anything, or everything, the player has ever done across all their playthroughs. Which NPCs they saved, then killed, then saved again in subsequent runs, for example. Or which items they consistently collected in every playthrough, or in none of them. Again, there's no evidence that Dark Souls makes use of any kind of meta progression. There's absolutely nothing about the world state that's known to persist between characters. But in theory, it's possible. The channel that Murloc's video is posted on appears to be their personal channel. It has a number of playlists organizing different content, mostly game footage and music. The video of the Undead Asylum is the first entry in a playlist that's just titled DS. It contains 9 videos posted between August and December of 2015. The first one after Undead Asylum is uploaded 2 weeks later. Its title is First Bell. The video opens with the player making their way through the remainder of the Undead Asylum. Most of the journey plays out no differently than in a normal playthrough, but one encounter has changed. A few minutes into the game, the player comes across an armored man slumped on the ground, dying. This is Oscar of Astora, the knight who sets the plot of Dark Souls in motion by freeing the player from their prison cell at the beginning of the game. He delivers his usual dialogue, but as he does, 2 of the subtitles shown are incorrect. The player skips through them almost too fast to notice, but the out-of-place text is visible on review. When Oscar says,
"Thank goodness, I'm done for, I'm afraid,"
the first subtitle reads instead, "So it was you, I had a feeling." The second reads, "And become the true Dark Lord." These 2 lines are snippets of cut dialogue. During development, Oscar was slated to play a larger role than he did in the final game. The interaction he would have voiced these 2 lines during has been removed, but the audio itself is still present in the game files. That interaction would have taken place on the steps of the Kiln of the First Flame, the final area of the game, just before the player fought the final boss and chose one of the game's 2 endings. The plot of Dark Souls is primarily concerned with the tension between the fading Age of Fire, the time of the gods, and the looming Age of Dark, the time of men. In the first ending, the player chooses to sacrifice themselves to sustain the mythic First Flame and continue the Age of Fire, if only temporarily. In the second, the player chooses to let the First Flame fade, assuming the mantle of Dark Lord and beginning the Age of Dark. In this cut interaction, Oscar would have declared his intent to pursue whichever ending the player did not commit to, and attacked them. The line starting with, "So it was you," comes from the version of Oscar that seeks to prolong the Age of Fire because the player has indicated that they wish to let the First Flame die. Similarly, the line starting with, "And become," comes from the version of Oscar that seeks to begin the Age of Dark. What's interesting is that even before this sequence was scrapped, both of these lines could never have been heard in the same playthrough. a player can't commit to both endings. Here, both subtitles are shown side by side. The rest of the journey through the asylum is uneventful. After escaping in the talons of a giant crow, the player arrives in the central hub area of the game, Firelink Shrine. They speak to some of the characters present there before heading for the Undead Burg, a decaying settlement littered with hollow soldiers. Early in that zone, they encounter the Hellkite Drake, a massive red dragon-like monster that roosts on the bridge spanning the burg's two sections. They pause to shoot arrows at its tail until it's severed, obtaining a powerful early-game weapon called the Drake's Sword. In Dark Souls, there are a number of unique weapons that can be obtained by severing the tails of particular enemies. Usually these enemies are bosses, or enemies in some way related to dragons. The player uses their new sword to fight their way through the remainder of the burg without much issue. Beyond that is the Undead Parish, the derelict church that houses one of the two bells of awakening which must be rung to advance the story. The player carves their way through a mob of hollows to the top of the church. They die once. A channeler, a tall mage with 6 creepy, stylized eyes drawn on its mask, gores them with its trident. But they make it to the end. On the roof of the parish, the player fights the Bell Gargoyles, a pair of monstrous statues that come to life to guard the church bell tower. They're able to use the Drake's Sword to sever one of their tails, picking up the gargoyle tail axe. They proceed to the top of the church to ring the bell. After descending the bell tower, the player runs across a character named Oswald of Kareem. Oswald is a pardoner. He may be paid in souls, the currency of the game, to absolve sin. Sin is an invisible status that players receive by attacking or killing certain NPCs, or performing actions the game considers profane. The player skips past Oswald's greeting to buy items from him, but the subtitle is briefly visible before they dismiss it.
Good tidings. Thou art welcome. Laudable is thy dedication to sin.
Oswald only delivers these lines if the player visits him for the first time after having committed a sin. By this point in the playthrough, the player hasn't done anything that would qualify them as a sinner, but the game state believes they have. The reason for this becomes clear later on. On their way out of the church, the player takes a detour to smash through some boards sealing up a back room on the upper floor. This room is where players can first meet Lautrec of Kareem, a wayward knight coincidentally hailing from the same homeland as Oswald. Lautrec is an acolyte of the goddess of fortune, and he's known for being smug and self-assured. His final line, spoken after he's confronted for murdering the Firekeeper in Firelink Shrine and stealing her soul, gives a good sense of his personality.
Well, look at you. I thought you were wiser. But I thought wrong. 'Tis a terrible pity. Like a moth flittering towards a flame.
In a normal playthrough, Lautrec is first encountered sitting behind a locked cell door for reasons unknown. He calmly attempts to convince the player to release him. They then have the option to retrieve the key to his cell and open it, or leave him imprisoned. However, if the player waits to seek him out until after slaying the Bell Gargoyles, he'll escape himself and his cell will be found empty. When the player climbs the stairs to the cell, the door is open. But Lautrec isn't gone yet. He's still slumped inside, unmoving. When the player approaches, his usual dialogue isn't what plays.
Why, you? How far will you come? Please, leave me alone. What have I done to you? Please, I beg of you.
These lines are cut dialogue from Lautrec. The audio exists in the game files, similar to Oscar's scrapped lines, but there's no trigger condition that should cause them to play in the final game. It's unclear what the original context for this audio was meant to be, but Lautrec sounds oddly out of character. He reacts as if he and the player have met before, and pleads with them not to hurt him. Immediately after the last line, a set of unevenly spaced, non-alphabetic characters appear in the subtitle box for a moment, before Lautrec's animation seems to bug. He becomes hostile and attacks the player. Lothrak is supposed to fight with two curved swords called shodels. Here, his right shodel is replaced with a weapon called the Notched Whip, a spiked whip whose item description describes it as only slightly effective against armor and tough scales, but quite formidable against enemies with exposed skin. At this point in the game, the player has relatively weak armor and certainly doesn't have scales, and the whip makes the player bleed with every hit. The player is given no choice but to kill him. When he finally dies, he drops the Ring of Favor and Protection, an accessory that increases the player's health and stamina significantly but breaks when removed. After leaving the parish, the player proceeds down into the lower Undead Burg. They kill the goat-headed Capra demon boss and enter the depths, a damp, maze-like sewer choked with poisonous rats. Early in this area, the player heads to a side room to free the trapped pyromancer Laurentius. Normally, a red-eyed cannibal enemy wielding a butcher knife is perched above the door where Laurentius is imprisoned. It jumps down for a surprise attack when the player approaches the doorway. Here, that enemy is absent. In fact, Laurentius, who is normally discovered trapped in a barrel, is already free when the player enters the room.
You. Yes, you. Here, over here. Please, you must help me.
He's still wrongly animated as though he's stuck in the barrel. His body floats slightly above the ground with his hands behind his back, but the prop itself isn't there. There's nothing holding him here. The player approaches and he delivers his typical dialogue begging to be freed. The prompt to interact with him reads, "Action event info, ? Which is placeholder text meant to be swapped in with the translated menu option, in this case talk. Also, while he's speaking, Japanese characters briefly appear in the top left corner of the screen. These characters translate to something like pot sorcerer, which is the internal name for Laurentius in the game's code. He's a pyromancer who's known for being found stuck in a pot. It's not clear why that text is showing up here, or what's wrong with the prompt. The player moves around the room uncertainly, rolling into different props. Something seems to trigger eventually. Laurentius' animation changes. They approach him again and he thanks them for saving him from being the missing cannibal's dinner, as if they had freed him the normal way.
Thank you. I would have been at supper without you. Been eaten alive. I shudder to think.
This isn't the only part of the depths where something is missing. Later on, as the player dives deeper into the sewers after defeating another channeler, they reach a hole in the ground. In a standard playthrough, falling down that hole lands the player right beside 3 bug-eyed basilisks. Basilisk Breath applies the curse status effect. When a player's curse bar fills, they turn to stone, killing them instantly. In the video, a player falls down the hole and lands in an empty room. They heal their fall damage and continue. There are about a dozen basilisks roaming the depths normally. Not a single one appears. Eventually, the player reaches the exit, a locked door leading down to the poisoned swamp of Blighttown. Something, or rather someone, should be present here but isn't. Domhnall of Xena is an eccentric odds and ends dealer. He's best known for selling the armor of select bosses after they're defeated, among other things like fragile but powerful crystal weapons. A player should first be able to meet him in the depths, sitting cross-legged beside the exit door. After the player rings both bells of awakening, Domhnall migrates to the bridge under the old aqueduct near Firelink Shrine, which requires a mostly harmless jump to reach. In the video, he's just missing. Except he isn't. Reviewing the footage from the previous video where the player climbs into that aqueduct, Domhnall can be seen in the distance, sitting under it. He's there the very first time the player enters Firelink Shrine, long before he's meant to arrive. The flag that's supposed to move him to his final location has already been tripped somehow, as though he freed himself from the depths, or something else prompted him to leave. The player proceeds to fight the gaping dragon. This boss is something like the Hellkite Drake, a descendant of the ancient dragons. He's become warped and deformed by desire and hunger, developing a giant mouth filled with long, curved teeth inside its ribcage. Something unusual happens during the cutscene that begins the fight. In the first shot, as the camera tracks slowly through the arena, a large round object covered in rough spines is visible in the center of the screen. Particles of blue-black smoke can be seen emanating from it. This object isn't part of the normal cutscene. It's difficult to even tell what it is. Just before the camera cuts away, there's a soft crunching or crackling sound heard. The rest of the cutscene plays out no differently than normal. When it ends, the area of the cistern the object was standing on is empty. It only rendered during the cinematic. The actual fight with the gaping dragon is fairly straightforward. The player baits out the same lunging attack again and again. At one point, they're able to sever its tail as well, picking up the powerful Dragon King Great Axe. They don't yet have the strength to wield it. One other, less noticeable anomaly can be observed during this fight. Occasionally, while circling around the dragon, the player's camera tilts up, where light comes in through a giant fissure in the ceiling leading to the surface. There's the silhouette of something hovering just outside the arena, in the empty space beyond the map. It's particularly visible right at the start of the fight, because the player is facing directly towards that wall. It's the model of a moonlight butterfly, an enemy encountered in only 2 areas of the game. The depths is neither of them. It can be seen in the distance a few times at the edge of the screen, fluttering serenely outside the arena. It's still there when the fight ends. After the dragon is slain, the player proceeds into Blighttown, the location of the second Bell of Awakening. But instead of heading to that bell, they run over to the far end of the swamp and enter an optional area called the Great Hollow. This zone is the interior of a giant dead tree called an arch tree. It's older than nearly anything else in the game. The hollow is a kind of vertical maze, a tangle of gnarled branches and ledges that the player has to carefully navigate down, while avoiding attacks from the area's basilisks. But the basilisks are gone here, too. The tree is eerily empty. It's not immediately obvious what the player is hoping to find by going down this optional path, but from later videos where they begin using the Dragon King Great Axe they just picked up, it's not difficult to guess. In Dark Souls, the stone scales of the ancient dragons have unique power. Those scales are intrinsically linked to the ancient dragon's immortality. Only by breaking through them could those dragons be slain. In the context of the game, scales are used to upgrade the damage of powerful draconic weapons, such as the Great Axe. By the time of the player's journey, the dragons are all but gone. Out of hundreds of collectible items, exactly 10 guaranteed dragon scales still exist in the game world. 5 of those are found in the same place, the place the player arrives after reaching the base of the Great Hollow. Ash Lake. Ash Lake is a secret area placed at the bottom of the world, physically below every other zone in the game. It's a lonely island, surrounded in all directions by endless water and towering arch trees. Most of Dark Souls' soundtrack is reserved for boss fights. The game's open areas are largely unscored, relying on ambient noise for atmosphere. Ash Lake is one of the few zones with a unique musical track associated with it. The haunting, droning chorus that fades in as soon as the player emerges from the tree into the open air, coupled with the sheer vastness of the landscape, both give the sense of being a small and fleeting visitor to something much deeper and older than you can fully appreciate. Something eternal. Walking along the shoreline, the player fights another dragon-like creature, a gigantic black hydra. They slowly cut off its heads one by one, and collect a pair of dragon scales from its corpse. They find the other 3 scales while fighting their way along the beach, which is populated by giant clams called man-eaters. Eventually, they arrive at the second bonfire of the area, which is kept by a creature called the Everlasting Dragon. The dragon is the heir to a 3rd age, predating the ages of fire and dark. The age before the first flame came into existence. The age before the world was capable of change. It's mentioned, briefly, in the very first words a player hears when they start a new game.
In the age of ancients, the world was unformed, shrouded by fog. A land of grey crags, arch trees, and everlasting dragons.
The Age of Ancients was the era of the primordial dragons. It ended long ago, when the god Gwyn and his allies discovered how to subvert the dragon's immortality and killed nearly all of them. Part of their legacy survives in Ash Lake. The everlasting dragon is described in item descriptions as the descendant of the ancient dragons. It's one of the very last true dragons, of which the drakes and hydras the players encountered so far are only imperfect imitations. It sits dispassionately in a nest made of large branches tucked in a cove at the edge of the beach. In some ways, the everlasting dragon comes off more like a totem or a symbol than a proper character. It never moves nor speaks, and it cannot be killed by any weapon or spell. All damage done to it is immediately healed. The player can sever its tail to obtain a unique weapon called the Dragon Greatsword, but doing so doesn't anger the creature or even provoke a reaction. When the area is reloaded, the tail will have grown back, as though it were never cut. It seems like this player wants to cut its tail, or is at least considering it. They circle around behind its back, but they're too late. Somehow the tail has already been severed, and the sword is lying in the sand as a stray item. The player pauses for a moment, seemingly confused, before picking it up. This is another of several times in this playthrough that there's a sense that someone or something is passing through the game world just ahead of them. They open the dragon's interaction menu and page through the options briefly, before closing it and turning back the way they came. There's only one more thing of note in this section. On the return journey, while walking along the beach next to a giant skull half sunken in the sand, the player sees the glow of an item hidden partway under the water off the shoreline. They pick up a key called the Archive Tower Cell Key. This key is meant to be found somewhere else, very far away from here. The description of the key reads, "Key to the cell of the Duke's Archive Tower. The Archive Tower, once a trove of precious tomes and letters, became a prison after the onset of Seath's madness." In a normal playthrough, the key is available in the Duke's archives, near the very top of the world, as distant as possible from Ash Lake. This key is used to open the door to a prison cell the player is sent to after being killed during an encounter with the demented dragon Seath the Scaleless. That boss fight is the only one in Dark Souls that's unwinnable by design. Seath is empowered by a magical crystal that instantly regenerates all damage done to him. As his name suggests, Seath was born without the stone scales of his fellow dragons, and therefore without natural everlasting life. This crystal is his attempt to engineer an artificial immortality for himself. In the rematch with Seath near the end of that zone, the player is given the chance to shatter it and render him mortal again. Ironically, despite his inborn fragility, Seath is one of the few dragons from the Age of Ancients that survives to the time of the player's journey. He was spared the fate of the other dragons because he betrayed them and helped the gods annihilate them. This key doesn't belong in Ash Lake. The door it opens is in here. The ascent back up the Great Hollow is much easier than it should be, mostly because the basilisks aren't present. The player makes their way back into Blighttown quickly. They take a short detour to find a blacksmith and upgrade the Dragon King Great Axe before heading for the area boss. The Great Axe is a powerful shockwave attack that makes quick work of Quelog, the half-spider witch guarding the second bell of awakening. The player rings the second bell. For a while after this, the playthrough proceeds without any aberrant behavior from the game. The player makes their way to Darkroot Garden, a mystical forest that's grown over the remnants of an old, dead kingdom. They farm souls by killing the powerful forest guardians there, so that they can level up and buy more upgrades. They also defeat the area boss, Sith, giant grey wolf. Afterwards, the player briefly returns to Firelink's shrine to buy more powerful fire spells from Laurentius, pyromancer from the depths, and talk to new arrivals like the priestess, Rhea of Thorlin. They also pick up a few stray items. Nothing unusual happens during these interactions, but there is something big noticeably missing from the area. Frampt is an ancient serpent that should appear in Firelink after both Bells of Awakening are rung. He's hard to miss. His model is famously both comic and disturbing, featuring bulbous red eyes and a mouth bulging with grotesquely oversized human teeth. Fram's role is to shepherd the player to the next area necessary for progression, and to explain what has to be done to achieve the first ending of Dark Souls and sustain the Age of Fire. If the player follows a certain set of steps, they can encounter a second serpent called Koth in a different area. Koth's role is to explain what has to be done to achieve the second, alternate ending and begin the Age of Dark. Some players have speculated over the years that if there were a third ending to Dark Souls, then a secret third serpent must be present somewhere in the game world to explain how it could be achieved. No evidence has ever been found that this third serpent exists. In this playthrough, even Frampt is missing, or at least late. The player climbs onto a broken roof to collect an item, and the pit where he should be located can be clearly seen. It's empty. Strangely, the crestfallen warrior sitting outside makes his usual complaint about Frampt's loud snoring, so some of the logic that should place him Firelink is working, but the character himself isn't present. The player proceeds to Sen's Fortress, a challenging area that becomes available after both Bells of Awakening have been run. The fortress is a kind of obstacle course filled with swinging pendulum blades and Indiana Jones-style arrow and boulder traps. The traps give the player trouble in a few places, but they persist. Only one unusual thing happens in this area. The player enters a small hidden room near the bottom of the fortress. Normally, this room contains a mimic, a monster disguised as a chest, ready to eat unsuspecting players that try to loot it. In their default state, mimics are supposed to look nearly identical to real chests. It's only when interacted with that they expose their gangly hidden limbs and jaws. This mimic is already standing up, not acknowledging the player at all. It can't be it. It's mostly still, but its head jerks occasionally like it's looping a test animation. Interestingly, it's making a V pose, which is the default pose of the mimic character model. It almost looks like it's doing the praise the sun gesture. The player continues to the top of the fortress and defeats the area boss, the Iron Golem. A ring of light appears on the ground and they interact with it. A cutscene plays. 3 wrinkled demons fly down, grab the player, and ferry them up to Anor Londo, the city of the gods. In a normal playthrough, during this cinematic triumphant music swells as the camera rises over the outer wall and reveals the cityscape from above, bathed in golden sunlight. This time, the cutscene is totally silent, and the city is dark. The towers and turrets of the buildings are only dimly visible against a cloudy sky, lit by a sickly colored green moon. This version of Anor Londo, sometimes called Twilight Anor Londo, can exist in the normal course of the game, but it shouldn't yet. The sunlight appearance of the city is an elaborate illusion maintained by the god Gwyndolin, son of Gwyn, Lord of Sunlight. The facade is meant to keep the pretense of a divine presence in the city, even though most of the gods have long since abandoned it. The player has an opportunity to break the spell and see the city as it truly looks by attacking Princess Guinevere, an illusory goddess modeled after another of Gwyn's children. But that isn't supposed to be possible without physically reaching the vision of Guinevere, and it's never meant to happen without the player explicitly choosing it.
And thy transgression shall not go unpunished.
Attacking Princess Guinevere and shattering the illusion is a form of sin.
Thou shalt perish in the twilight.
In fact, it's one of the few permanent sins that Oswald the Pardoner cannot absolve the player of. Based on Oswald's dialogue in the parish, the player somehow incurred that sin before they ever entered the city. Twilight Anor Londo is known for being quiet and a little eerie, but here it feels different, more barren. Part of that owes to the unusual emptiness of the area. After the illusion of sunlight Anor Londo is dispelled, most of the city's inhabitants, like the armored sentinels standing guard outside the gates, vanish alongside the sunlight, having been only illusions themselves. In this video, some of the enemies that should remain are mysteriously absent as well. As the player approaches the first bonfire, they find its firekeeper gone. This firekeeper is a knight in service of Gwyndolin called the Lady of the Darkling. She should be hostile and attack the player if the Guinevere is killed, but she isn't even here. Her character has to be alive somewhere though, at least according to the game's accounting. The bonfire she tends is automatically extinguished if she dies, and here it's still very much usable. The path forward threads through a church. Normally, this area features a tricky sequence requiring the player to slowly cross the narrow church rafters while navigating around several enemies armed with throwing knives. But in the video, the veiled monks who guard this church are missing. The building is completely empty. At least, it seems empty at first. Halfway across the rafters, while slowly stepping forward on a narrow beam, there's a loud, crisp crunching sound, like a thin piece of glass or crystal breaking, or an egg cracking. The player stops and turns their camera around, but there's nothing visible. They descend to an area called the Dark Moon Tomb. An illusory statue of Gwyn should be present here, obscuring the entrance to the hidden chamber where Gwyndolin resides. In a standard playthrough, when a vision of Princess Guinevere is killed, Gwyndolin becomes hostile and vows to punish the player for defacing the image of a goddess. The player can then enter a fog wall in this chamber and challenge him as a boss. That fog wall is already evaporated. The player enters the dark, empty corridor where the fight would have occurred and begins walking. There's the faint sound of wind whistling in the background. When they're about halfway across, a cutscene suddenly begins to play. Much like the cutscene that introduced Anor Londo earlier, this cutscene is silent even though it shouldn't be. It also wrongly shows the original sunlit version of Anor Londo. This is the only time the city is seen in that state during this playthrough. This cutscene is meant to play when Gwyndolin dies. His last words aren't audible. Subtitles appear, but they aren't subtitles for him. First subtitle is a mix of characters similar to the one that appeared in the second video, in place of one of Lautrec's subtitles. It uses some of the same symbols, albeit in a different order. The second subtitle is just an ellipsis. Looking at both this message and the parish message together, it becomes easier to tell that these symbols aren't random. There's some kind of code. That code turns out to be the Rosicrucian cipher, sometimes called the Pigpen cipher. It's recreated crudely using borrowed Unicode symbols from set theory and geometry, likely so that it could be rendered in the limited character set supported by the Dark Souls subtitle font. The subtitle that appears here reads, Flawed. Using the same rules, the earlier subtitle for Lautrec can be decoded to read, Faithless. The cutscene is unusual in another way. Something is clearly wrong with Gwyndolin's character model. The most obvious issue is that one of the slender or graceful serpents that protrudes from under his robe is grossly oversized. It bends and snaps at odd angles as the model skeleton struggles to animate it properly. But the stranger detail is his crown, which appears to have been warped and pulled backward into his head, creating a misshapen trumpet-like tumor of shiny metal where his face should be. The shape the disfigured crown forms, pointed tendrils drooping down from a bulbous center, is oddly reminiscent of a completely unrelated creature present in the game. The Paisaka are enemies found only in the Duke's archives. They're human women who have been abducted and experimented on, turning into barely recognizable monsters. The crown seen here vaguely resembles their heads. After the cutscene ends, the player continues to the open chamber at the end of the hallway. This room contains 3 chests. The chests center and right contain what they should, the Sunlight Blade spell and the brass armor set. But the left chest is usually empty. In the video, it contains Priscilla's dagger. This is a knife obtained by severing the tail of the half-dragon Priscilla, daughter of Guinevere and Seath, in the painted world of Ariamis. Leaving the tomb, the player proceeds to the cathedral, the main playable section of Anor Londo. As they're slowly climbing a buttress to enter through a balcony, they encounter the first enemy so far in the area. The Silver Knights, Gwyn's faceless servants, are still present in this version of the city. One shoots the player with an arrow, knocking them down and sending them falling to their death. That part actually is fairly normal for this section of the game. The player is eventually able to come back and kill the knight, picking up 3 Dragon Slayer arrows from its corpse. They enter the cathedral and slowly work their way through the remaining knights. The fight with Dragon Slayer Ornstein and Executioner Smo, the dual bosses of Anor Londo, plays out mostly as normal, except for the fact that the arena has become dark prematurely like the rest of the city. Also, the large statues of Gwyn and Guinevere that sit at the end of the Grand Hall where the fight takes place are absent. In fact, on review it seems like nearly all the statues of the gods and their champions have been removed from Anor Londo. This includes a statue of Ornstein at the entrance, and a statue of Guinevere in the church. The only statues that remain are those of the Silver Knights. After the battle, the player takes an elevator up to the area where they're meant to meet the vision of Guinevere, the chamber of the princess. They open the ornate doors and emerge into an empty room. They walk around in the dark for a while, but there's nothing there. This is the room where Guinevere is meant to give the player the Lord Vessel, a key item that makes it possible to access the endgame areas, and ultimately to finish the game and choose an ending. But based on the interaction with Oswald all the way back in the parish, Guinevere was dead before the player entered Anor Londo. There's no Lord Vessel to receive. The story can't be finished. The playlist doesn't end there, however. It continues for 3 more videos. At the start of the next one, titled New Londo, the player returns to the entrance of Anor Londo. They don't stop at the bonfire to spend the souls from the boss fight. They travel the left-hand path this time and arrive at the gateway to the Duke's archives. It's sealed with one of the golden barriers that requires the Lord Vessel to dispel. The player collects an item lying outside the entryway, the Crystal Ring Shield. The description of this shield reads, "Weapon born from the mystical creature of the Darkroot Garden, the Moonlight Butterfly, imbued with a powerful crystal power, like the butterfly created by Seath the Scaleless." Seath is the boss waiting beyond the golden barrier, but this shield is only supposed to be obtainable if the player defeats a separate boss, the Moonlight Butterfly of Darkroot Garden. The only way to create it is to use the butterfly's soul to transform a regular shield. It shouldn't be a collectible item at all, much less collectible in Anor Londo. Walking back from the sealed door to the archives, the player stops to look at a surreal graphical aberration that wasn't visible until now. A distorted mirror of the geometry of the Anor Londo Cathedral has appeared directly above the original building. This chaotic growth of upside-down spires and towers is just hanging in the air over the dark city ominously. At the Anor Londo wall, the demons that ferried the player into the city are missing. There's a set of glowing grey-white symbols present on the ground near the spot where the player first arrived. These visual effects belong to Dragon Eye signs, which could be placed in the game world by players who join the Covenant associated with the ancient dragons. There are 6 eyes present in total, arranged in 2 columns of 3. This is the same pattern as the one on the masks of the channelers encountered just before the player severed the tails of the Bell Gargoyle and the Gaping Dragon. No prompt appears to interact with the eyes, but as the player steps over them, a cutscene plays. It's a bugged version of the cutscene that's meant to play on departure from the city. The demon that is supposed to carry the player doesn't render. Instead, the player is abruptly hoisted into the sky, seemingly by nothing. They're transported back to Sun's fortress. The skybox and much of the surrounding scenery, trees, mountains, buildings in the distance, are failing to render. In their place is empty grey space. As they descend the elevator and exit the fortress, the serpent men that should be guarding the way back are gone. They cross the bridge into the undead parish, where large parts of the map geometry are again failing to appear. It's as if chunks have been bitten out of the game world at random. The mountain the parish sits on is missing, leaving the building hanging unnaturally in the air. The stone gargoyles on the roof are also gone. Entering the undead parish bonfire chamber, they discover the bonfire itself is gone too. In fact, all the visible fire is gone from this area. The meshes representing torches are still on the walls, but the actual flame effect has been disabled. The familiar rhythmic metal clanking of Andre the blacksmith hammering in the basement could still be heard. But when the player descends the stairs, Andre himself has vanished, along with his anvil and his tools. All that remains to show he was ever there is an orphan sound cue. A hammer striking metal over and over, coming from nowhere. The player continues into the church, where they find no enemies. The statues in this area are also missing from their usual places, most notably the statue of a mother and child that sits behind the church altar. The player walks to the elevator that will convey them back to Firelink Shrine. As they leave, a muddled black shape barely visible behind a column can be seen for a moment at the edge of the screen. The player returns to Firelink. The empty grey space that's replaced much of the environment is more noticeable here. None of the familiar characters are present. The cleric Petrus is no longer standing in the courtyard where he usually is, though the message instructing the player on how to use the gesture he teaches is still there. Laurentius isn't sitting against a wall anymore. Even the crestfallen warrior that was there from the very beginning is gone. The central bonfire is gone, too. There aren't many places left to go. The player entered from the church, and the aqueduct that should lead into the undead burg now just stops existing halfway across the sky. As they go to descend the stairway beneath Firelink Shrine, the same black shape is visible in the corner of the screen. It's closer than it was in the parish. A low squelching sound can be heard when it appears. Halfway down the stairs, they pass by the cell containing the firekeeper, Anastasia. It's empty, except for a faint grey mist behind the bars. The player takes an elevator down to the New Londo ruins. This zone is what remains of a once prosperous human city whose leaders fell to the corrupting influence of the dark, the unbridled essence of humanity. It was intentionally flooded, drowning its inhabitants, in an effort to contain the dangerous power being born inside. By the time of the player's journey, it's been reduced to a watery mass grave. They cross the narrow wooden bridge into the city. The level of the dark water beneath the bridge is much lower than it should be. The player is supposed to progress into the city to drain this water so that they can access the lower regions, but something else has already drained it. New Londo is the first place since Anor Londo that the player encounters an enemy. The pale white ghosts of the city's drowned residents are still present in their original places. They have idle animations, but they don't move, attack, or otherwise acknowledge the player. The player kills a few with the great axe. A status icon under the stamina bar shows that this weapon's durability is low, but they have no means of repairing it since the blacksmith and bonfires are gone. These ghosts should drop souls, but they don't. What's more unusual than the fact that the ghosts don't respond to the player's presence is that they do take damage from the player's attacks. The ghosts of New Londo are programmed to be immune to all damage unless it's inflicted by certain cursed weapons that this player doesn't have, or unless the player themselves has the cursed status effect. The fact that the Great Axe connects instead of harmlessly passing through them suggests that either something about the ghost's internal logic is misfiring, or some flag has been set that's making the game think the player is cursed even though they aren't. They approach an abandoned building. This building should be where they meet Ingward, a sorcerer who provides the key to the mechanism to drain the water from the city. When the player reaches the roof he stands on, he isn't there. In his place is a glowing collectible, attached to the dead rat model used in the depths in the asylum. The player picks it up, receiving Ingward's red robes, his tin magic catalyst, and his cursed blade. These aren't the items Ingward is supposed to drop if he's killed. These are the items equipped on his eternal model. So it's not that he died. Something removed everything he was carrying, and then removed him. The player reaches the bottom of the city. The gate that should lead out to the Valley of the Drakes instead leads to a now familiar grey void. The floor of New Londo is caked with piles of waterlogged corpses. Some of these corpses spill out past the open gate, just floating in the air. The player approaches the edge, but doesn't take the risk and see if they can go further. Even the ghosts are gone now. There are no items and nothing to interact with until the player reaches the very end of the area. There, they find a fog wall. This wall leads to the area boss of Anor Londo, the Four Kings. Despite everything else, it still seems to be functioning. They approach it. When they're halfway there, a malformed black shape appears in the camera behind the player suddenly. There's a squelching sound as something slams into their character from behind, knocking them to the ground and killing them in a single blow. As the death chime plays, the player turns the camera around to see something slouching in the dark. It's large and black with smoky tendrils whipping around it. There's only a little time to look at it before the screen fades to black. When they respawn, the player is back in Firelink Shrine, but they aren't at the usual spawn point near the bonfire. Instead, they're standing high in the air, in the central tower overlooking this area. The game HUD is gone. They walk around experimentally and turn the camera, and it becomes clear that nearly the entire map has vanished. The graveyard behind the shrine, the bonfire pit in the front, as well as the distant aqueduct and the elevator to the undead parish are all gone. Beyond the tower, the grey void stretches out seemingly endlessly in all directions. The player circles up and down the stairs a few times and tries running to the outer edges, but they find nothing. Attempting to walk off the edge sends them falling to their death. They respawn at the top of the tower. It's only one object the player finds that they're able to interact with. A bird's nest, only a few feet from the spot where they were revived. In the normal game, the player can approach it and receive a prompt to curl up into a ball. This allows the crow that carried them to Firelink Shrine to return them to the undead asylum. That prompt appears, but the curl up text is replaced by a final Rosicrucian cipher. This one can be translated to the word fleeting. A cutscene starts to play for only a second before it's stopped. The player loads into the asylum map. The imposing mountains and storm clouds visible in the distance during the first visit have all vanished. The 4 torch-bearing hollows which are meant to attack the player on their return are gone. They walk into the gate that they opened at the very beginning of the game. Just as in Firelink, the tutorial messages written on the ground are still present. A scripted event that's meant to make the floor collapse beneath them when they cross a certain threshold never occurs. They reach the courtyard. The first bonfire of the game is gone. The player descends the ladder and waves through the water to reach the corridor of prison cells from the beginning. The torches on the walls are unlit. They walk down until they arrive at the cell. The cell door is closed, and this time, no prompt appears to open it. The player is no longer being invited to go inside. Behind the door, the hollow that they killed at the very beginning is still kneeling in the same spot, praying silently. The player stands there uncertainly for a moment. They turn back the way they came and start walking towards the courtyard. At the foot of the stairs, there's an abrupt squelching sound. The player turns. The collision fails, and they fall through the floor to their death. The video ends in a blank gray screen. The final video in the playlist is titled Ending. It begins with the player character running towards a dark horizon. The screen is so dim that it takes a moment to recognize this area. It's Ash Lake. player walks along the sandbar. In the distance, the clouds are gone, but the looming silhouettes of the arch trees remain. There's something new between them, though. Huge mottled shapes on the water, motionless. It's impossible to be sure what they are. The player follows the arc of the beach to the nest of branches where the everlasting dragon should be sitting. As they round the final bend, they see a colossal black shape ahead. Seath. He looks wrong. His body, usually pale white, is a flat black color. Strange swellings bulge from his head, his neck, his back. His elegant wings are bare, leaving only frail, spindly black bones twisting in the wind behind him. But it's clearly him. The player slowly walks closer. Seath turns. For a second, we can see the black rectangle of an empty message box appear on screen. The game freezes. After a few seconds, the still frame transitions to a blank screen. This lasts for another 45 seconds until the video ends. Looking back through Murlock's videos, there's a lot that's difficult to explain, but a general picture comes through it. There are signs that Murlock's world is broken in some way from the beginning. In the asylum, the game allows them to open the door to a cell they shouldn't be able to open. Inside, they receive a stone that can cure curses, but they shouldn't be cursed yet. Similarly, Oswald greets them as though they've sinned, but they shouldn't have sinned yet. The game keeps hinting at repairing things that aren't or shouldn't be broken. As the player progresses, things keep happening before they should, as though something else is progressing the game state for them. Domhnall reaches Firelink of his own accord and is absent from the depths. Laurentius is already free when the player arrives, and his captor has been disposed of. Princess Guinevere is slain off-screen, forcing the player to traverse Anor Londo in the dark. Gwyndolin has been removed as well. The water in New Londo has already been drained on arrival. All of these are choices that have been made for the player well in advance. And from one perspective, something is broken in the world of Dark Souls. Something is broken because of a choice made long before the player's time. Before fire, the world was grey and changeless. The gods killed that world when they killed the dragons, and created a new world in its place. But again and again in this playthrough, the player is reminded that the dragons aren't really gone. Their memory casts a long shadow. The player crosses paths with hydras, drakes, the gaping dragon, all of them the imperfect or corrupted progeny of the original dragons. They sever the tails of these creatures and obtain draconic weapons. In the case of the everlasting dragon of Ash Lake, perhaps the last true eternal dragon, that tail is already severed before the player arrives. And the final tail-cut weapon they receive shows up in a chest that should be empty, in the Tomb of the Gods. 3 Rosicrucian ciphers appear embedded in the game's interface at different points of the playthrough. 2 are attached to certain characters, 1 to an object in the world. Lothrek's code reads, Faithless, and Gwyndolin's, Flawed. The final code, visible in the prompt to enter the crow's nest and return to the beginning of the game, reads, Fleeting. The simplest explanation is that the ciphered words refer to what's being shown on screen when they appear. Lothrek is a faithless criminal that's best known for repaying the player for granting him his freedom by murdering one of their allies. Gwyndolin is certainly viewed as having been born aberrant relative to the other gods, and the description of the Darkmoon ring associated with his covenant describes him as repulsive and frail. Whether he's flawed or simply different is a matter of perspective. The crow's nest is less clear, though. The crow's presence in the game is fleeting, sure. There are only 2 opportunities to interact with it, and both times it appears briefly and without explanation. But the same could be said for most of the characters in Dark Souls. Alternatively, maybe the word fleeting refers not to the crow or to its nest, but to the moment itself. The prompt appears only when nearly all of the game's world and its inhabitants have disappeared. The world of Dark Souls itself was fleeting. Now it's returning to the empty grey where it began. These 3 words could also refer to something else. There's another presence that clearly recurs throughout these videos. Seath the Scaleless. The key to the cell he imprisons the player in appears inexplicably in the sand in Ash Lake. 6 dragon eyes arranged in the same pattern as those depicted on the masks of the channelers, his servants, are wrongly present in Anor Londo. Signs of his creation, the Moonlight Butterfly, appear during the fight with the Gaping Dragon, and again outside the entrance to the Duke's archives. The final tail-cut weapon the player collects is that of his daughter, Priscilla. And the only base game weapon of that kind that's absent in this playthrough is the Moonlight Greatsword, the weapon obtained by severing Seath's own tail. Seath was born flawed, without stone scales. He turned faithless, betraying his kind to Gwyn and sealing their fate. And in the end, he proved fleeting. Despite everything, he never managed to attain true immortality. The Greek writer Aeschylus' tragedy, Prometheus Bound, is the first and only surviving part of a trilogy called the Prometheia. The title character of the play is Prometheus, a Titan, one of the primordial giants who ruled the ancient world. Prometheus is by his nature distinct from others of his kind. He's a cunning planner and strategist. His name literally translates to foresight. By contrast, the other Titans are primal, guileless beings of raw power. When the war between the Titans and the newborn gods erupts, Prometheus foresees that the gods will triumph in the end. To survive, he betrays his kind and helps the king of the gods, Zeus, defeat them and imprison them in Tartarus. As his reward, he's allowed to remain free in the new age that he helped to create. Later, when Zeus declares his intent to destroy a nascent humanity, Prometheus defies him and gifts mankind with the power of fire in an effort to protect us. He succeeds, but is finally struck down for his transgression. Seath is also an outsider by nature. His moniker, the Scaleless, reminds the player every time he's mentioned in the game exactly what sets him apart from the other dragons. Unlike Prometheus, though, Seath is distinguished from the rest of his kind not by a unique strength, but by a unique weakness. His birth is implied to be a source of shame for him rather than pride. He certainly doesn't regard his condition to be any sort of gift. Like Prometheus, Seath betrayed his own kind to the Ascendant gods, but his motivations for doing so are murkier. In Dark Souls 2, the dialogue of one of Seath's monstrous progeny, encountered many generations after the events of Dark Souls, hints at a possible reason.
Our master was a tragically lonely soul. He resented those who had what he lacked and became fully mired in hatred.
The exact role that Seath played in the demise of the dragons is left ambiguous, but some interpretations of the lore suggest it was he who revealed to Gwyn that the stone scales of dragons made them immortal, and that by piercing those scales they could be slain. By that reading, Seath and Prometheus are again doing the same thing, but Seath's intent is much less sympathetic. Whether out of spite, self-preservation instinct, or something else, he steals and exposes secret knowledge out of a desire not to save a race, but to destroy one. In the end, Aeschylus depicts Prometheus as mostly without regrets, even after he's been chained to the rock. He knew, more or less, what betraying the Titans and defying Zeus to save mankind would cost him, because foresight is in his nature. He makes no apologies to the Titans, the gods, or anyone else for his choices. With Seath, it's not so straightforward. It's not clear if he fully understood the nature of the new world his decisions would create, or what those decisions would cost him. It's hard to say if he ever felt anything like remorse. Either way, in the last minutes of the final video, Seath, or some version of him, is returned to Ash Lake, the last vestige of the Age of Ancients. The everlasting dragon is gone. Seath is alone. Murloc's final video was uploaded in December 2015. Their channel has never posted another one. No one else has ever reported being able to open the door of the first cell on the right in the Undead Asylum.